Hi guys. So we are back for another section of your notes. If we start with the calendar, we are now in week 3. We're at day 1 with notes section 6. Tonight, what you have to go with this is the Hoover worksheet, which there is another video for. And then this is just recommended. You do not have to do it this way, but I also have review guide unit 4 here. This you could do over the next few days. You see I don't have the review guide multiple choice assigned. I know you can't see me, but I'm doing quotations until the end of this week. But just as long as Unit 4 and the multiple choice get done this week, you do it at your own pace whenever you would like to. Okay, so that is enough of that. Let's get right started. So, the last couple of videos that we have talked about have been building up to the Great Depression, and today we are going to see this major turning point. And I use that word turning point that we've seen before in our short essays because we are really going to see a pivotal moment where the United States goes from the booming 20s where the stock market's doing really well, people are spending, 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 life seems to be doing great, and we are going to pivot right into a darker time where the economy is moving down. And from the last time we talked, when we did the business cycle, the 1920s are the prosperity and the recession part of this. The business cycle can happen very quickly. The recession part of the 1920s to the 1930s is almost instantaneous. It happens very quickly, and then we are in a depression. So we're going to see that kind of shift today. So, continuing on with the causes of the Great Depression, a major cause is going to be that high tariff. What's a tariff? I've asked you this about 10 million times this year. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. What does a tariff do? A tariff encourages people to buy American made goods by making the imported goods or the product that we would get from other countries more expensive. High tariff, that is supported by Republican presidents. During the 1920s, we are going to see only Republican presidents. We had Harding, we had Coolidge, we're going to talk about Hoover today. All three of them, Republican presidents, all three of them support a high tariff to encourage people to buy American made goods. The high tariff that we are going to see that really pushes us deeper into the Great Depression is going to be the tariff called Hawley-Smoot, after the people that create it in Congress. This is going to raise the price of those foreign made goods to a point where they cannot compete with American made goods. They are made to be so expensive that no one can buy these goods. In retaliation to this, the European nations are going to create protective tariffs of their own. That's only fair. If we won't sell their product here, why would they want to sell our products there? So a protective tariff is kind of hurting us double fold here because we can only sell, or majority of our product is only being sold to our market, the Americans, and not really being bought and sold overseas. Something else that pushes European nations to not really buy American made goods, after World War I, they have to put their focus into repairing their own nations. They don't have money to spend to pay the tariff to the United States or buy the goods from the United States at the price that we're willing to sell them at. So this creates the problem of underconsumption because manufacturers in the United States were producing to be able to sell not only here but overseas. And when Europe doesn't buy, that means we have a lot of extra stuff. And when we produce too much and we have to make cutbacks, that's when we lay people off. We start to fire them because we don't need as many workers. We're not producing as much. And this causes unemployment to rise in the United States. Buying on margin. If I had to pick one cause to give my left hand to say this is what caused the Great Depression, I would point directly at buying on margin. I cannot express to you how just damaging it was to our economy. So again, what does buying on margin mean? This means that when you don't have enough money to buy into a certain company or purchase a stock in a company, then you would borrow that money. You put down some of your own and then you borrow the rest from what we call a broker. So somebody fronts you the rest of the money, but you're going to have to pay that back eventually. And the hopes when people bought on margin was, say they'd pay, overall the stock was $5. They'd put $2 down, they'd borrow $3 in the hopes that in a few weeks that stock that was originally $5 might be $10. Then they could pay back their loan, they make back their money, and they make a little extra money. The stock market had been going with that trend for some time. People thought that this was the best get rich quick scheme that they could ever buy into. So the demand for stocks was very high. The supply was very low because people were buying. There wasn't a lot available. And this made the price of stocks go even higher. Remember, when we talked about supply, demand, and price, when there's a high demand, a low supply, that means we have a high price. And then the opposite, when there's a low demand and a high price, or in a high supply, we have a low price because we want to get rid of it. But right now we're seeing high demand of stock, low supply of stock, very high price. And because of that high price, a lot of Americans would buy that stock on margin, hoping that they would make money off of it in the long run. The dangers of this, though, is if you borrow money and the stock price goes down, you still have to pay back your broker. That doesn't just go away. So not only would you have lost money when the stock price goes down, but now you have to find somewhere to pay back, some way to pay back the money that you didn't have in the first place. And oftentimes when the stock price went down, those people that bought the stock on margin, they couldn't pay it back. There's nowhere for them to get the money. So this creates a whole slew of problems. And all of those causes that we've been talking about over the last couple sections lead us right into what we call the immediate cause, the final breaking point, the tipping point that threw us right into the Great Depression. And this immediate cause is going to be called Black Tuesday. You guys know it as the stock market crash, the Great Crash. In September of 1929, we see that period of recession. The stock market had began its decline. Prices of the stocks had hit their peak and they were starting to come down. But everybody was so confident that investors were like, the prices are coming down, buy up some more. We've seen this. The prices are going to rise eventually. They go up and down, they fluctuate so much. Just buy now, it'll pay off in the long run. So investors, they have so much confidence that they're not really selling everything all at once. Some people are starting to sell as the prices continued to fall and they were not making improvements. People started to panic. That panic is what causes Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, when the market officially crashed. The people that had bought on margin, we call them speculators. When you speculate about something, you take a guess. Uh, if I always think of like detectives, they speculate on everything. They take a guess at the who done it. A speculator in the stock market takes a guess on which stocks are going to do well. They buy on margin. They kind of put all their eggs in a few baskets, and they hope that it's going to go up. Those speculators are the ones that lost the most. They lost everything they had. When the market crashed and it just kept going down and down and down, they sold their stock, but they had no chance of making back the money that they had put into it. The Great Crash of October 29th, 1929 represents a depression. Billions of dollars are going to be lost as the stock prices fall. The stock market crash here on Black Tuesday is a signal for a number of events that are going to cause the United States economy to completely collapse. The worst depression that we had ever seen. Now, before I move forward, I want you guys to take a peek at this video. Don't worry, we're not going to watch the whole thing. I want you to watch a couple minutes of this just to see that shift that we had just talked about.
20s and the economic boom that accompanied it were coming to a close. By September and early October 1929, stock prices, which had reached great highs during the bull market, began to decline. There were false expectations. Investors began to lose confidence in the market, and the crisis of confidence led to a selling panic, and then the inevitable happened.
1929, Black Tuesday. The New York Stock Exchange is in a panic. Frantic investors have scrambled to unload their stocks at any price. Everyone wants to sell. No one wants to buy. Suddenly, even the most gilt-edged securities are practically valueless.
Black Tuesday 1929 was actually the climax of the most difficult week Wall Street had ever seen. On October 24th, there had been almost a free fall in the morning. The bankers and the big men on Wall Street rallied and started buying, and it seemed like a heroic rescue of the market. Then on Monday, it was a devastating day, the worst day in the market ever. So then Black Tuesday dawned with people just almost immobilized with fear.
The tremendous crowds which you see gathered outside the stock exchange are due to the greatest crash in the history of the New York Stock Exchange in market prices.
People who were buying on margin, essentially paying only 10 to 20% of the total cost for a stock while borrowing the rest, were wiped out when they were called to pay back those loans. By 1933, almost half of America's banks had failed. Unemployment rose to 25%. The Great Depression had set in.
So it was the opening act in what became a horrific 2.5-year period in the market. People had lost jobs and couldn't buy. People were afraid of losing jobs and were afraid to buy. And business was afraid of expanding because nobody was buying.
The economy.
Okay, we are going to stop there because I want to get into a little bit of what they said. So our immediate cause, Black Tuesday, October 29th, the crash of the stock market. We are going to shift now because that was our turning point. The stock market crash is the turning point. Now we have to look at what path, what trajectory is the country now on. In that video, it mentioned that banks were going to fail. So banks, I told you the other day, are not really being regulated by the government. There isn't really regulation on who the banks can give loans to, how much, things like that. Today, you have to have a good credit score. They look at your income and they say, okay, are you going to make enough money for us to give you this loan? Not during the 1920s. Everybody got a loan. I think of that meme with Oprah where she's pointing and she's like, you get a loan, you get get a loan, you get a loan. That's exactly what was happening. So banks had lent a lot of money to those speculators who were buying on margin. And when the stock market crashes, none of those speculators are being able to pay those loans back. They didn't have the money in the first place, and now the only hope and dream they had, the stock market, is doing really, really poorly. When the stock market starts to crash, people who had put their money in the bank are going to lose all of their savings because the bank had made those risky investments in those speculators who went out and kind of gambled away all of the money. Consumers who bought on credit, remember those people who were buying the washing machines, the new fancy vacuums, and the irons, and the radios, and the cars, that had bought on credit or were paying installments, they aren't going to have enough money to make their payments now. Manufacturers who were making all of those consumer goods, people aren't really in the market to buy a new car when they just lost their whole life savings in the bank. So manufacturers are going to have to lay workers off, and they're going to have to cut the wages of the workers that they do make in order to make up for the people not buying. So you have high unemployment. When people don't have jobs, they don't have money, which means they're not spending. And then people who were doing all the spending, those middle class American families, they are going to start to depend on soup kitchens and charity lines. The 1930s are going to see this very dark time in the United States where nobody's buying, nobody can sell. Businesses aren't expanding because of those reasons, and we really have to depend on each other as a country to pull us out of this. Cue President Hoover. President Hoover probably has the worst possible luck of any president in the United States. Hoover was the Secretary of Commerce. Commerce is the business under Harding and Coolidge. So he's a government guy. He was in the cabinet for the past two presidents. He's a Republican. Coolidge is going to step out of the presidency and choose not to run for that third term in 1928 and allow Hoover to step in. So Hoover says, as a Republican, I am going to continue this prosperity that we've seen for the last two presidents. You've got to think all throughout the 20s, these Republican presidents had been building up the economy. Everything was great. There was peace. We weren't involved in any conflicts around the world. They had kept up their end of the bargain on normalcy, peace, prosperity. So Hoover runs on that idea. He says, I see no future or no fear for the future of our country. Man, oh man, could this guy have not been any more wrong? 7 months. Let that sink in. 7 months after he was elected into the presidency, the stock market crashes. The guy that just won an entire election saying, I see no fear for the future of our country, just walked smack dab into the stock market crash. Hoover's going to do what he can with his party to attempt to revive the economy, but he sticks to his guns on the idea of a limited government, which means the government under Hoover, he doesn't want them getting involved. He doesn't believe that it's the government's job to step in. Now we've got to look at these political party posters over here. Vote for Hoover. Don't change now. He's telling the people, why the heck would you go with a Democrat? The Republicans have been doing great forever. And I just love this one. The wise old bird says, Hoover. Of course, making it so that people recognize the past record of the Republicans and vote for them again. So Hoover, he could not have had a worse reaction. I get it, it was his political beliefs, but he could not have had a worse reaction to the Great Depression. Hoover is going to say the way we fix this depression, this crash, It's for the wealthy Americans to volunteer to support those that are in need. They're going to be the ones who have all of the money. They should really offer that up, supply goods to help all the families that have lost their homes because they can't pay the mortgage. Um, he's going to really believe that the wealthy people will be good and really step up to the plate. Now, many people are going to lose their homes right now. Many people had bought their homes by you getting a loan from the bank. Remember, the banks are giving out loans like candy on Halloween. And now they cannot pay back those loans. Many have lost their jobs. Most of them lost all of their savings in the banks. Some of them had taken chances in the stock market and they lost money there. And when you can't make your mortgage payment, you don't get to keep your home. A lot of the homeless are going to build these shacks in these shanty towns that you can see in the pictures there, and they name them Hoovervilles. The point here is to associate the name of the president with the suffering of the common man, because they directly blame Hoover for not doing anything to help them. Hoover's idea here is trickle-down economics. We are going to throw money at the top of the economic period, which is at the top of those businesses, and hope that the businesses would create jobs, hire people, and that is how the money would reach the base, down at the bottom, the common man. But it doesn't work. It does not work at all. Business does not increase. Not enough jobs are created. Not enough people are put back to work. And when people don't have jobs, they don't spend. And we can't get out of this mess if people don't start spending. Hoover's best response was the Hoover Dam. And the reason it was a good response was because it brings construction jobs to the Southwest where unemployment was high, just like the rest of the country. And by giving people jobs, you put money in their hands, and when you do that, people start to spend, and that's how we're going to get out of here. But it doesn't give enough jobs. He doesn't do it across the country. So while it was helpful one time, he doesn't take that idea and run with it. We won't see that until we talk about the next president. Americans are going to catch on. Okay, there's nothing that gets people more angry than when they're suffering and they don't have money. And they're going to start to demand change from the top. So where this starts is in 1932, you are going to see a push in Washington, D.C. from World War I veterans. World War I veterans had been said that they could have, they earned a war bonus from fighting in World War I. Now, it hadn't been paid back to them yet. It was kind of an IOU, will pay you at a later date. But the people are suffering. 1932. It's been 3 years since the stock market crashed. We are getting into the thick mud now, and people want money. And the veterans say the government owes me money. I'm going to go collect. So how are they going to do that? Well, they push up on Washington, and they go and camp out in front of in front of the Senate, in front of the House, because that's where the law was going to be passed to say, here you go, here's your money. And they are demanding that they be paid. We call these veterans that go and camp out on the White House lawn, on the Senate lawn, on the House lawn, we call them the bonus army because they are looking for their bonus. Now, you're going to watch a video in just a second. But first, the police in Washington, D.C. attempt to remove the veterans, but that doesn't seem to go very well. So Hoover teams up with the National Guard and tries to remove the veterans, but it goes south really, really quick. And the army is going to remove these veterans using tear gas. They're going to burn down the houses that they had built up, those shacks that they had built up. They are going to beat them. There are going to be some that are killed. This treatment of veterans is the worst PR that could have ever happened to Hoover. Hoover's handling of the bonus army, I would put a huge star next to this one because it is the reason that he does not get reelected in 1932. The Depression was bad enough. The stock market crash was really bad. His handling of this depression was bad, but the kiss of death was the bonus army and how he handled it. I have one more video for you, and then I'll let you go. I promise. We're not going to watch the whole thing of this one either. We're only going to watch like 3 minutes.
In 1932, Walter Waters, a World War I veteran from Burns, Oregon, learned of a bill that was going before Congress that advocated for the immediate cash payment of the veterans' bonus. He became passionate about what it would mean for him and so many other veterans. Seeing the success of other lobbying groups in Washington sparked an idea. Veterans just needed their own lobby. Waters gathered a group together to board a rail car and head to Washington. The group called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force, or the BEF, in reference to their service in the AEF in World War I. As word of the movement grew, more veterans became interested. Many had no jobs or homes to tie them down, and saw the Bonus Expeditionary Force as the best means to achieve their goals. Through hitching rides and gathering donations in veteran marches, veterans and their families slowly made their way to the Capitol. Newspapers across the country began spreading word of the bonus army headed to Washington to take on the politicians. Meanwhile, those in Washington were getting nervous. President Hoover didn't want them to come. MacArthur and others saw them as a communist force and were concerned about civil insurrection and the possibility of a revolution. Pelham Glassford, the D.C. police chief, however, was a World War I vet and felt sympathy for the cause, urging patience to those in leadership. Nevertheless, the army began preparing with gas, tanks, and troops, many of the same hazards the bonus marchers had met with more than a decade before in France. By 1932, over 10,000 bonus marchers had arrived in Washington, and more were on their way. Setting up temporary housing and shacks and erecting tents in front of Congress, veterans banded together. In addition to concerns about communism and revolution, some in Washington also feared the color lines that were being crossed in the BEF camps. African American veterans and white veterans lived side by side, a symbol of hope for desegregation in a deeply divided pre-civil rights era America. Late that spring, Wright Patman of Texas sponsored a bill that would immediately pay the veterans in full. The bill inspired heated debates, with Congressman Edward Eslick dying of a heart attack on the floor of Congress during an impassioned speech promoting the bill. The House of Representatives would pass the bonus bill, 211 to 176, and by June 17, 1932, the bill was being debated in the Senate. Veterans held a vigil outside of Congress, chanting, "The Yanks are starving," and lobbying any member of Congress that would listen. The song, "Brother Can You Spare a Dime," became a rallying cry for veterans and for the country. But the bill would never pass the Senate, and Waters had to inform veterans they'd lost their battle with Washington. On July 16th, as Congress ended its session, senators and representatives were slinking out through secret exits to avoid having to see the veterans still camped on their front lawn demanding answers. The police department and the White House pleaded with veterans to leave, and eventually over 11,000 marchers did, but several thousand remained, refusing to give up. On July 28th, the police began to forcibly evict the veterans from their shanty homes. Chaos ensued as veterans threw objects and police reacted with force. 2 veterans were shot and killed by police, furthering tensions between the veterans and their government. Deciding that the police department was not handling the conflict well, Hoover authorized MacArthur and the military to evict the veterans back across the bridge to Anacostia. MacArthur, along with Patton and other World War I veterans, brought in the cavalry, infantry, and tanks. They began pushing veterans out of the city, using smoke bombs and tear gas. When he reached the bridge, MacArthur decided not to follow Hoover's orders to stop. He instead ordered the troops to continue to pursue, and the veterans in the BEF panicked, believing the troops would kill them. The troops moved through the camps with fury, setting fire to shacks and roughly handling veterans and their families. Later that year, Hoover lost his bid for re-election, and on November 8, 1932, Roosevelt was elected president.
Okay, and that is exactly where we are going to pick up in Section 7 with a new approach. Don't forget that, where did it go? There it is. Don't forget that you have the Hoover worksheet that goes with this, so you can hear a little bit from Hoover yourself. Next time, we are going to tune in for Section 7 of the notes. Any questions? As always, email me.